Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Peggy Jean Willow, an Egyptologist from Germany, and I'm taking you along on my journey through ancient Egyptian history. I've written a children's book about ancient Egypt that I'm currently editing, and at the same time I'm developing the illustrations myself. So what you see here on my channel is a beginner in watercolor painting. I'm not starting from scratch as an artist. I've basically been one since early childhood. But I'm also one of those people who put their creative ambitions aside for a few years in favor of a job that pays the rent. I think many of you can relate to that, and I'd love to hear your story. Feel free to share it in the comments. But maybe you're here also to just relax and watch me paint. I totally get that. I am a massive art consumer myself, especially here on YouTube. I love those ASMR relaxation videos where beautiful artwork comes to life, and my absolute favorites are watercolor paintings. I've realized that they kind of document the process of letting go, of detaching from the outcome, and you simply never know how the water is going to react. Sure, you develop techniques over time that improve your work, but you learn how fast your paper dries, you figure out why certain colors harmonize better than others, and so on. But in the end, there's always that element of the unknown that comes with art, right? For this painting here, I want to illustrate a temple entrance. It is a so-called pylon, and I thought I'd give the whole thing a frame of a sky and a desert that rounds off the image, quite literally. And as always, I have no idea if this is going to work out or not. We will see it at the end. And honestly, I want to be upfront about this. I will scan these illustrations and edit them digitally to fit the book layout. I keep reminding myself that the text, the actual content of the book, plays the biggest role, and the illustrations are there to complete the picture. But it's important to me that it stays visually appealing for kids. So I try to play with shapes and colors in a way that's different from what you do for an older audience, for example. And this background here, for example, it is meant to elevate the otherwise rather monotone beige sandstone pylon and draw the young reader's eye into the scene. Do you know that feeling? You start with a big brush and you dive so deep into the color, with watercolors quite literally, that you completely forgot you have a whole bunch of other brushes. So like small ones, big ones, thick ones, the thin ones, the round brushes, the flat brushes, and so on. And if I'm not careful, I end up painting everything with one single filbert brush. When I'm sketching, I'm usually pretty relaxed because pencil is easy to erase. But the moment I start adding color, I feel this strange mix of tension and relaxation. And when the colors bleed into each other and create a beautiful effect that I didn't even plan, it's like this moment, like almost like healing, you know. But if I pick the wrong shade, or if these little puddles start forming, you know, those edges where the pigments pool together, sometimes that looks great, but sometimes I start scrubbing over them with a wet brush, trying to fix it while it's still wet. This paper here, I'm using Arches Satinado or Satinado for this illustration. Lets you lift the pigments fairly easily and correct mistakes, thank God. But watercolors are always a little tricky. You can have a plan, a clear vision of what it should look like, but there's always this ugly phase where you just don't know, is this going to turn into something beautiful? Or did I just ruin it? And here's a classic beginner mistake in watercolor that I keep making. With the layering technique, it's important to start with the lighter areas, okay? Sometimes I pick specific elements to color first, only to realize too late that as a right-hander, I should have started from the left, okay? Here I painted the niches in the pylon from the right side first. These niches, by the way, are believed to have once held flagpoles that were placed in front of the temple. But now, if I want to continue painting to the left, I will smear with my hand right over that. And so I have to be extra careful and let everything dry properly first. I notice how I keep checking the overall image, constantly trying to evaluate its artistic value. And I wonder where this inner critic keeps coming from before I'm even remotely finished. As some of you may know from my previous videos, I come from a family of artists, of porcelain painters, musicians, theater actors, and so on. And there's this one line, I think it was my grandmother's or so, that's ringing in my ear right now. Whenever she saw something that didn't quite match her taste, she'd say, "That looks like naive peasant painting." Yeah, I mean, we all judge our surroundings. I'm no exception, and sometimes we blurt out things that just pop into our heads when we don't like something. But the simple fact that this remark from my childhood burned itself so deeply into my memory says a lot about the impact we leave when we criticize someone else's art. Because what's really happening is that we are not judging someone else's creativity or technical skill. We are actually judging ourselves. I'm becoming more and more aware of that. I see other people's artwork and think, that's not how I would have done it. But I've stopped categorizing art into valuable and less valuable. I've actually reached a point where I say everything is art if it came from the heart, regardless of whether your hand is shaking or whether after 1,000 brush strokes you can draw a line so straight it looks like you used a ruler. And speaking of which, yes, I did use a ruler for the sketch of this temple. I had to, because architecture in particular relies on straight lines. And you know what? This is actually a beautiful bridge to something the ancient Egyptians understood very well, the process of creation. They broke it down with incredible precision. They personified the individual steps as deities. Perception, the moment you become aware that you want something, that was the goddess Sia. The act of speaking it out or writing it down, that was Hu. The magical power to set it all in motion, this was Heka. And then there was Irer, which means seeing, and the gem, hearing. 14 creative forces in total. Everything that modern philosophers repeat in their own words, with their own metaphors, were always adapted to the spirit of their times. The ancient Egyptians did the very same thing thousands of years ago. They just wrapped it in mythology. And that's precisely how they ensured the continuation of creation like hardly any other culture ever did. And isn't that exactly what we do here? I recognize what I want to create. That's Sia. I sketch it, I write it down. That's Hu. I pick up the brush and trust the process. That's Heka. And at the end, there's something on the paper that didn't exist before. Something materialized, visualized, and with that, stabilized. I think the ancient Egyptians would have loved watercolors. Okay, so much for now. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!